Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys. In today's video, we're going to talk about wildlife photography workshops. And this is part two. I'm actually going to tell you behind the scenes from the host's perspective. What's it like to run a wildlife photography workshop right after this? I'd gotten quite a few questions from people about workshops. What do I look for? What's it all about? Is it worth it? And I covered that in part one, more from the perspective of the client. So if you haven't checked out that video and you're curious about wildlife photography workshops, make sure you check out that video. But in this video, I thought I'd turn the tables and tell you a little bit about what it's like to host a wildlife photography workshop. So in this video, we're going to talk about the pros and the cons and maybe some of the things you never thought about. Now, this video could be for somebody that's thinking about hosting or conducting a wildlife photography workshop, or maybe you're just curious what it feels like to run one. So let's get to it now. And let's start with the pros. Now, there's some pretty obvious advantages to hosting a workshop. Primarily, you're doing something you probably really enjoy. And for a lot of people, this can be very appealing. I will tell you I'm going to share some personal experiences in this. This is one of those quick thoughts, opinion pieces. So I always like to give you my perspective on this. Hopefully you find it interesting. A few years ago, I was interested in earning some side income. And I did a video on this. If you haven't ever seen this one, it's how I made money with wildlife photography. And it is pretty interesting. I give you every revenue stream. And one of those streams was conducting workshops. For me, I was at a point in my life where I just wanted to pay for gear and travel a little bit. And it's expensive. And I'm sure I am not the only one who has thought of this. And one of the ways I thought of is I'm pretty good with birds. I know a lot of locations. I could probably take people out and show them the birds, and they'd probably pay. And there is an audience for this, both locally and as destinations. Now, I covered that again in part one. I talked a little bit about the differences here, but you can make money in your own backyard if you know the area very well. So probably the biggest pro from conducting a workshop is the ability to do something that you really love. And at the same time, you're making money. For a lot of us, we might already be out in the field. So why not make a little money in the process? The second part of this is that the workshops themselves, relative to a full-time job, can be lucrative by the hour, meaning you may not book your schedule up 40 hours a week, but if you conduct 1 or 2 workshops a week and those workshops run between $100 and $300 locally, and it's doing something you're already doing, seems pretty enticing. So the biggest pros about this are the ability for it to become lucrative even on a localized basis, doing something you would already be doing, and most importantly, doing something you love. So why doesn't everybody do it? Well, there's a lot that people don't think about, and there's actually a lot of cons to this business. And I want to talk about those before anybody thinks at this point in the video, I'm going to run out and start teaching people how to do this. Before I get into the cons, I do want to make this point. I've referenced this a few times, whether it's with teachers or workshop conductors. It takes real experience. And to become great at something, I always challenge people, like how long does it take to be great at that? And how many hours or how many years do you have to put into a hobby? I don't think anybody can do this and consider themselves an expert in just a year or two. Several years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. I don't think I conducted my first paid workshop till about 6 years in. And I was doing it very regularly. And I knew my area very well. So that puts it a little bit into perspective. There are some people out there that will offer workshops and they haven't really done it for a long time, and they may not even be experts in the field. So something to consider. But let's say you're at that point. You're 5 or 6 years in, you're an expert in the field, you like to do it and you want to make some side money. What are the downfalls, or what do I really need to watch for? There's 4 primary downfalls, and 2 of them are pretty practical and affect me a lot. And then 2 of them are just sometimes things we need to consider when running any business. Let's start with those considerations, those logistical factors that are just there that we need to be aware of. And the first one is taxes. Now, I'd like to believe that everybody pays taxes on all the earnings that they make, but I know that's not true. With workshops, you should budget yourself that you're going to lose some of those dollars in taxes. So a $200 workshop for a few hours could turn down to $150 or $120 after taxes. Just be aware of that. It may not be quite as lucrative as you think. The bigger implication here, the bigger logistical thing that people often overlook is insurance. And I do not want you to take this one lightly. When conducting any physical activity like a workshop where you're going out in the field, you're hiking around, you're moving, there is always a chance that somebody is going to damage their equipment during that process or, unfortunately, even damage themselves. It could be twisting an ankle or hurting themselves, anything that could happen. And if you're doing this, I'll say under the table, if you're doing this as, hey, it's just a side income, no big deal, nobody really knows, what happens when somebody turns an ankle and those medical bills are not covered and they start looking at you because you were the one conducting the workshop. It took me a long time to take people out onto a few destinations because those included rocky hills and cliffs. And until I had insurance, I would not take people out there. So I'm talking about liability insurance. I don't want to do a video on insurance. I've had a lot of people ask me about this. There are different types of insurance. There's an insurance that covers your gear. You can often get that on a homeowner's policy or what they call a rider. You can sign up for a professional photography association, which may offer some insurance. But you really need to understand, what does the insurance cover? If it's only covering gear and somebody hurts themselves during a workshop, the liability is not covered. So that is something to consider. And so when you start layering the costs of this, the destinations, the gas, the wear and tear, the taxes, now the insurance, all of a sudden that $200 or $300 starts to whittle down pretty quickly. And there are some risks associated. Now, that is just the monetary and some of the logistical implications of a workshop, but let me give you two more. Now, these last two cons, depending on who you are, could really affect you a lot. And these two factors that I always caution people about is ethics and locations. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories when I get into ethics and locations. Hopefully you'll find these interesting, but let's just talk about the ethics of it. There are real situations, I have been there, where we're conducting a workshop and the client wants more than I might be comfortable offering. There's some examples of that. Can you get a little closer? Can you play some calls to get them in? Can you flush the bird so I can get, and these are real situations. These are real clients who have asked me those things. What I have done, and I'll just share my personal way to handle this, is I try to cover that up front. I talk about what I am ethically able to do and what I am not. And there are some people that aren't comfortable with what I am going to offer. So for example, if I say we're going to go out on a workshop and these are the things I will do to attract birds, and they say I'm not comfortable with that, no harm, no foul. I would much rather find that out on the communication side and find somebody who is comfortable with those guidelines than put somebody in a very awkward situation where they're expecting lots of things to happen. And in order for me as the host to make those happen, I have to produce some criteria. I have to do something. I have to offer some stimulus, or I have to get close to the birds. I have to go somewhere where maybe they're not comfortable. Best to talk about all of that up front and have both parties understand what are the ethics involved and will you be willing to breach those ethics as a host? And I will tell you this. It might sound like the easy answer is I won't breach my ethics. Try putting a paying client next to you with demands that you may not be comfortable fulfilling, and it becomes very, very tough. And it creates almost an antagonistic environment between expectations. I have this theory about expectations. I've probably talked about it on this channel before, where the majority of conflict in our personal lives revolves around a lack of consistency on expectations. Two people just don't expect the same things. And again, better to get all of that out up front. So there is this ethical implication on both parties, but certainly from the host's perspective, are they willing to draw a line in their ethics, and does their ethics line up with the client's? Now, the second implication is around locations, and this one is huge for me. I'm going to share my personal perspective on this. And again, this is just my opinion. I conduct very, very limited workshops. I only conduct them, by the way, for my Patreon audience. I don't even offer them to the public. So if somebody contacts me, first thing I ask is, are you on Patreon? Because I want to know that I know this person. The second thing I ask is, where are you from? And this sounds really odd. I don't conduct workshops with local people. And that sounds really strange because that would be your target audience, right? Well, they live 5 miles away. This is ideal. And here's the reason. In those areas where location is critical, and for my workshops, location is critical. I'm not willing to compromise those by making them public. And that puts me in a really tough spot as a host. I want to take you out there. I want to show you, but before we get out there, I got to tell you, these locations are confidential. I can't have that person sign an agreement or a waiver or non-disclosure, but it's the reason I try to have a personal connection. I will say this is a part-time job for me, so I'm very lucky that I get to pick and choose. One of the reasons, and this is a big factor for me, one of the reasons I have consciously not decided to do photography full-time is, one, the insurance costs way too much, and two, I know I would have to sell out. I know I would have to sell out. I would take these locations, which matter a lot to me. These locations have an intrinsic value to me that is really, really, really important. And to have people show up there and tell their friends, and I'm photographing on my own, and then people start showing up, it just doesn't feel good to me. It actually ruins the experience. So I weigh these things very, very heavily when deciding who can come out on a workshop and also where I'm going to go. There are some locations that I simply do not workshop. I just don't take people there because they're too valuable to me as a person. So when conducting workshops, this might not sound like a big deal, but it really is. I'm going to tell you a story about a location. This is a true story. I'm not going to use any names or locations. I'll try to avoid the species. But I was conducting a workshop with somebody, and we were out in an area, and somebody came past us and kind of said hello, but it wasn't one of those real friendly hellos. It was kind of like, hey. The next day, we're scouting, by the way. We bring some clients out. We each have a client. Same person sees us. They are obviously there quite a bit. And they don't say hello and they don't look happy. Just not happy. Third day, we're out again. I believe this time alone. I'm in one area, other person's in another area, and this person comes up and basically says, "What are you doing here?" The words, I'll paraphrase the wording they used. This is our area. You can't bring people here. Now, this is going to cause some conversation down in the comments. I am really interested into your opinion, but I want you to think about this carefully. I always try to put myself in somebody else's shoes. So I always try to see the other perspective. The easy answer is this: not your area. It's public. There's people over there. There's people over there. It's kind of like a camping area, not your area. But there were species there that were very appealing to photographers, and nobody else was doing it. So this small group of photographers or wildlife conservationists, they owned this area, and they had these species all to themselves. And here they come. Here come the workshops, here come the clients, and guess what comes next? Word of mouth. Where'd you shoot it? And even if the workshop person isn't going to tell, what about the client? Their friends are going to ask them, "Oh, just go here." And all of a sudden, that once secluded, once private area, which was public, is no longer that. So while it's easy to say it's public, I have every right to go there, and they're not requiring a fee. I can take whoever I want out there, and I can run a workshop there. And sometimes that is very, very true. I try to look at it from the other side, and here's my perspective. There are locations where I go to be alone and to have peace and quiet in nature. And they photograph really, really well. I don't tell anybody about these spots. I don't take anybody there. If I take a client to one of these locations, it is very, very private. In other words, you can't tell anybody. And it's only people I know. How would I feel if I was up there one day and a photographer, a workshop leader, brought a client to that spot? The sun is rising. I'm in touch with nature. I'm feeling good. This is public land. I don't own it. For the last 8 years, I've thought of this as my spot because I'm the only one there. And then more come. And now this person says, "Wow, this is a great spot. I'm going to do this once a day. I'm going to bring a client up once a day." So the area that was mine, public land, but I felt in my mind was mine, is now compromised because of somebody else. How do I feel as a person about that? And I need you to be honest here, because I know a lot of people are just going to say, "No big deal. It's public. It's not yours. You don't own it. You're gatekeeping." But how would you feel? How would you feel if your favorite fishing hole, suddenly there was a guide coming up with people paying to fish in a public place that you fished for the last 20 years by yourself? How would you feel? So those are very real implications. I can tell you in that situation, I felt very uncomfortable. And while I think there's an attitude of, well, we can do what we want, I'm earning a living, part of me said, yeah, but I understand it. And I'm not comfortable doing it. So I'm also, as much as I don't want people coming to my spots, I'm also not super comfortable encroaching in areas that are also private. Much different from a public area that everybody knows about or that is open to the public and there's a lot of people there and there's no real sense of ownership about it. There are public destinations, lots of people go, lots of people run workshops, some of the same areas, some of the same locations. Not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those more intimate moments. So I want you to think about that and down in the comments, let me know. And while those are the major points of this video, I just wanted to include a couple other things. For those of you that, again, might be on the fence, like, well, he raises some good points on both sides. Is there anything I'm missing? Well, there is some other time that can be invested here. And when thinking about these hourly wages of $50, $100 an hour, whatever the person is charging to run a workshop, there are some other considerations and some other time factors. There's a lot more that goes into any business rather than just the time in the field. So there's also prep work that's involved. And there might even be some follow-up work. So these could be things like, hosting websites and sending out newsletters and communications, dealing with clients one-on-one. There's always that. There is also this idea of scouting, which is a little unique to wildlife photography. I can't trust what has historically happened at a spot to happen again this year. So for example, I want to take somebody out and they want to see a bird. And I say, oh yeah, bird's there every year. Am I comfortable showing up the day of a workshop to show somebody a bird that was there the last 4 years, but have not seen them this year? Now, that's pretty challenging. So often what I need to do when running a workshop is I need to go to the area. So for every new location, I need to make a visit and I need to scout it and see, how's the light hitting this year? Are the birds there? What are the perches like? Is there anything I need to do to prep the area? What do I need to do? So there's some time invested that way that a lot of people don't consider. So in this video, I tried to give you a couple things to think about. I tried to get past just this mindset of $1 per hour. Wow, $50 or $100 an hour, that sounds like pretty good money. I'll sign up for that. But what about? What about the taxes? What about the insurance? What about the liability? What about the locations and sharing? What about the ethics? What also about the client? We really didn't talk about clients as people. And one of the reasons I like to know my audience before I take them out is because I deal with the public every day in a full-time job and I know what they can be like. So that's another consideration all to its own. When you're dealing with randomized people, you really never know what you're going to get. So that's the video for today. Quick and easy. Hopefully you found it interesting. What do you think down in the comments? Have you ever considered doing this? And does this video give you any different perspective? And is there anything obvious that I missed? I always wonder, like, should I have put this in? Is there this little intricacy that I missed in this video? So let me know down below, and it just helps me for future videos. Down below, you're also going to see a subscribe button. Make sure you hit that, and there's a little bell for notifications. It'll let you know when I have a new video out. I love doing these videos for you guys, and I really appreciate your support on all of them. And as always, I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.